Here on our channel, people's stories come to life. Stories from different eras, professions, and destinies. Each of them follows their own path, their own life woven from circumstances, challenges, and choices. Before we step into their world, make sure to subscribe, and later, share your impressions in the comments. Now, let's begin. Some stories don't start with loud events. They start small, with details, with moments that seem insignificant, yet hold entire worlds within them. These are stories about people who never chose to be heroes. They simply lived, worked, made mistakes, learned from them, and kept moving forward. The lives of such people unfold like a slowly blooming flower, each petal revealing itself in its own time, each layer hiding new secrets, new pains, new joys. This is a story from a time when the world was just a little different. The city has not yet awakened. Morning drifts slowly from the fog that curls along the roofs and gutters like pale smoke exhaled from a tired mouth. Inside the poor quarter on the city's edge, a forge begins to echo. Sparks leap and fade. Iron sighs. The voice of a hammer sets the rhythm of another day. And somewhere within that rhythm lives a boy, small, absorbed, his hands roughened too early for their age. The boy's father works with disciplined calm. He bends over the anvil, speaking little, yet the sound of each strike carries correction enough. Poverty leaves little room for tenderness. Only in the pauses between their work does the boy sense the man's quiet pride. His mother moves silently through their narrow dwelling, brushing soot from the window panes that never quite clear. At dusk, she lights a tallow candle and murmurs that light is a good spirit. It visits only where hearts do not harden beyond repair. The boy believes her, though he has seen far more shadows than light. By late morning, the bell of the parish church tolls faintly across the roofs, signaling to nearby workshops. The city listens to nothing but work. Even laughter has a tired sound to it here, abrupt, practical, like a cough between chores. The boy carries tin scraps in a rough burlap sack, delivering them to his master's neighbor in exchange for a crust of rye bread. "Prices have risen again," the baker complains, though the bread seems smaller each week. The boy nods, pretending to understand. In the workshop, the smell of heated metal mingles with damp straw and smoke. He learns to bend, solder, and rivet with precision. He finds satisfaction in order, how edge meets edge, how the metal grows obedient under heat. Sometimes he daydreams that tin is like time, malleable only when hot. Later, when it cools, nothing can bend it again. It is a thought that will stay with him for many years. Toward evening, his work done, he crouches by the doorway, tracing shapes in the dust. Across the street, a lamplighter walks his route, his long pole balanced like a staff of quiet authority. He pauses under each post, lifts the glass hatch, and sets the small mantle aflame. The flame trembles once, then steadies, whispering back the day's noise as the street slowly brightens. The boy feels drawn to that motion, the ritual of light conquering dusk, one lamp at a time. His father notices the boy's gaze and mutters that lamplighters earn little and breathe foul air every night. Yet the boy wonders if that light, though frail, might still change how darkness feels. Some evenings, when work keeps him late, he lingers to watch the process again. The lamplighter moves neither quickly nor slow, careful not to spill a single drop of the precious oil. Each lamp, when awakened, mirrors briefly in the puddles underfoot. To a boy of thin boots and wide eyes, it seems like stars coming down to live among men. One afternoon, a minor official visits the workshop, wearing a dark coat that smells faintly of lavender and power. His speech is short, his patience shorter. The father bows slightly and hands over his tax due in coarse coins. The boy studies the man's polished boots, wonders what compels such people to never look down. When the official leaves, the air feels heavier, as if the soot decided to stay a while. In that silence, the father scratches his beard and whispers, just once, that being too noticeable brings no good. It becomes one of the boy's earliest lessons. Better to light quietly than burn bright and fast. The city itself hums faintly through the evenings, lanterns flickering like thoughts on the edge of sleep. Cobbled alleys breathe dampness. Distant laughter drifts from taverns the boy is too young to enter. Yet he senses life there, rough, unapologetic, filled with stories. He feels both part of it and apart from it. On nights when rain keeps him awake, he listens to the steady patter on the roof and wonders if the lamplighter still walks his circuit, defying the weather with each small fire. By winter, the boy grows into his chores. His hands ache less. He judges the heat of iron by its color, no longer needing to flinch. His humor develops, quiet, wry, tested in exchanges with other apprentices. They share jokes around a brazier, speaking of things they dream to own, fine boots, sharp tools, or their own shop one day. Dreams are modest here, but sincerity gives them weight. The boy notices how elder craftsmen laugh about hope, yet guard their tools as if each were a promise. Somewhere, within the rhythm of hammer and flame, he begins to understand that life, like metal, shapes only under both patience and pain. Spring arrives hesitantly, thinning the city's chill, but not its labor. The streets regain their noise, markets open earlier. A new factory embarks construction on the nearby square, employing men for heavy work. Rumors of higher wages spread like warm smoke, but so does uncertainty. Accidents, strained backs, broken contracts. The boy's father mutters that promises build slower than disappointment. Each phrase, half grumbled, settles in the boy's mind like grit before turning into wisdom. One day, his mother falls ill for a week. The workshop air thickens without her quiet presence in the evenings. The boy burns his finger on a pot handle and curses softly, startled by his own voice echoing in the empty room. When she recovers, she laughs gently, saying that pain teaches faster than kindness. She is right. Healing, like trust, needs time. But time in a poor household moves faster when measured by coins and bread. As summer deepens, the boy's sense of the world expands beyond streets he knows. He hears news from travelers in the tavern, revolts simmering elsewhere, new machines arriving from England, and railways that promise to erase distance. For him, these are only words, but they draw distant horizons closer. Still, he wakes before dawn, rinses his face in the same cold basin, and walks the same path to the forge. Even the most curious mind learns that duty, not curiosity, keeps hunger away. Yet something shifts one evening. The light lingers unusually long, painting the rooftops gold. On his errand home, the boy pauses by the canal where lamps are being cleaned for installation. He watches the reflection of each lantern in the still water, forming twin rows of fire, above and below, heaven and ground. The lamplighter passes again, older now, his face calm behind soot. The boy gathers the courage to ask, "Do you tire of lighting the same lamps every night?" The man chuckles, a sound like an old hinge turning, and replies, "No, boy. The lamps are the same, but the nights never are." Then he walks on. The answer remains with the boy like an ember refusing to die. That night, he dreams not of tools, but of distant streets glowing one after another, endless and serene. When he wakes, he tells no one, yet the glow endures behind his eyelids each time he closes them. Autumn approaches again, with wind pushing dry leaves across the lane. The forge grows colder, smoke hangs low. The boy's laughter softens, replaced by quiet endurance. Life becomes steady, almost predictable, and in that steadiness, dignity hides. He knows someday he will leave this workshop, perhaps for another trade. He does not yet imagine that his small fascination with lamplight will lead him to the night's heart, nor that a single flame will one day cast shadows strong enough to change everything. But for now, though the city sleeps, a boy sits on a stone step, holding a bit of scrap tin in his hands. It catches the faint glow of a street lamp just lit beyond the mist. The metal flickers once, then cools. He smiles almost imperceptibly. Somewhere far off another lantern blooms. Vienna exhales, and so begins his quiet path toward light. The city breathes with a slow heaviness after rain. Roofs gleam like slate mirrors, and puddles gather along the guild quarter where horses clatter through narrow alleys. Morning belongs to vendors and apprentices. The shouts, the smell of damp wool, the click of coins. Somewhere among them walks a young man carrying a metal-latched box of tools and the patience of someone who has learned to expect little from fortune. He has outgrown his boy's awkward gait, but not the quiet that once filled his days. His shoulders carry the posture of habit, his hands the blunt strength of repetition. Now fully employed in a workshop that repairs household utensils and lantern parts, he earns enough to rent a small room above a cobbler. The rent takes more than half of his pay, but stability carries its own warmth. The window looks upon a courtyard where pigeons strut and washerwomen hang linen like banners of daily struggle. The smell of soap and coal dust gives the mornings a kind of certainty. At work, the old craftsman who trained him often jokes that tin is the city's second bloodstream. It binds teapots, buckets, and lamps, all patched and mended rather than replaced. "Everything breaks here," the craftsman says, "and almost everything can be repaired." The young man smiles politely. He knows this is only half true. Some things, when cracked, never recover their first shape. Yet it soothes him to believe in his trade's modest victory against decay. He saves coins carefully, counting them beneath the flicker of a single candle. Once a week, he allows himself to visit the tavern near the Danube Canal, a crowded room where barrels of cheap beer tower like patient witnesses. There, voices rise against the gloom, talking of strikes, of new factories, of chance and injustice. The young man listens more than he speaks, cautious among men who shout their opinions freely but seldom risk them. He finds safety in humor, quietly mocking misfortunes that everyone shares without offending anyone. Those moments of laughter make him feel part of the city's current instead of drifting outside it. Late one evening, he meets Clara. She works at the public baths, folding linens and scrubbing tiles until her hands chap from steam and soap. She carries herself briskly but not proudly, joking with customers and turning hardship into rhythm. They speak little at first, passing words near the baker's stall. Over time, their nods become smiles, and one day she hands him a loaf of bread still warm from the oven. He looks at it as one might look at a coin made of sunlight, uncertain if he deserves it. They share it later beside the canal, watching the faint shimmer of city lamps dancing on the water. Work consumes most of his days, yet a restlessness begins to slow the hours. He wonders about those who walk freely, even after dusk, men with better coats, polished shoes, servants trailing them like faint shadows. He feels no bitterness, only distance. His humor remains intact, cushioning envy into wry acceptance. One must bow to the wind, he tells himself, so the hat stays on. When the chance arises to assist an old lamplighter, he accepts. The man, half blind from years of smoke, needs help along the steeper districts where rooftops cling to crooked streets. The work seems simple. Light each post with a pole, refill oil, trim the wick, and move on before the flame can die. Yet it is heavier than it looks. The metal ladder digs into his shoulder, his boots slip on slick stones, and the oil burns his skin when spilled. But when the first dusk's lamp bursts into steady glow, an odd calm grows inside him. To bring light, even borrowed light, feels gentler than beating metal. The lamplighter speaks rarely. When he does, his words carry a rhythm of smoke and wisdom. He says that silence is the best uniform for men who work at night. People fear shadows, but rarely thank the hands that chase them away. "You'll see things others don't," the old man adds once. "Just make sure you forget them fast." The younger man laughs, not understanding yet that the advice is more serious than it sounds. Their route passes through Leopoldstadt, where new shops line the streets and families from many provinces crowd the courtyards. The scent of fresh bread, horses, and coal mix into one long sigh of the district. Children run behind him, shouting nicknames, some mocking, others kind. He tells them the lamps are their evening stars, brought down for closer look. They giggle, not sure whether to believe him. The city feels alive in these exchanges, softer, briefly forgiving. Still, wages remain low. Some nights he skips supper, letting the work and cold air fill his stomach instead. He lends small sums to friends who never repay them. Afterwards he laughs it off, saying, "Money spoils if kept too long." Yet each lost coin quietly joins the growing list of small regrets he never voices. A cautious distance grows between him and those he once trusted easily. He learns to hide his kindness under a rougher tone, a disguise more effective than anger. Winter comes again, crisp and gray. At dawn, frost forms delicate veins along broken panes. His mother's letters speak of illness, then recoveries, then silence. He visits rarely, the fare too expensive, and guilt folds itself into the steady rhythm of work. On holidays, he sends parcels, a shawl, a small tin box of sweets, humble gifts carrying the shape of his absence. In the lamplighter's lodging house near the stables, he becomes known for reliability. He laughs at the coarse jokes and listens when older men discuss politics he barely understands. Yet, by habit, he watches everyone's manner with quiet caution. Who defers to whom? Who drinks without paying? Around authority, he lowers his eyes. Among peers, he tries to lift their spirits. Experience has taught him that surviving among others is an art not unlike mending metal. Warmth first, pressure after, and a quick release when things start to bend too much. One fog-cloaked evening, as he and his mentor light the lamps along a narrow lane, the old man fumbles his wick trimmer and curses softly. The flame flickers uncertainly before catching, sending a tremor of golden smoke through the mist. Every lamp, the old man says with a sigh, is like a breath of the city. Some nights it's steady, some nights it sputters. The younger man nods, watching the glow ripple over bricks and shivering gutters. He senses that each lamp indeed holds a fragment of the city's pulse, fragile, necessary, easily forgotten when the morning returns. By late spring, the old lamplighter retires, leaving the route to him entirely. The city's trust comes with a small badge and a key to the oil storage. He cleans the lamps with vinegar, replacing cracked glass panes, proud of this quiet responsibility. Clara helps sew patches on his coat, laughing that he now smells permanently of smoke and turpentine. They share moments of rare peace on Sunday walks through the Prater, where music drifts from the distance, and vendors sell roasted chestnuts wrapped in paper. He imagines that this could be enough: steady work, modest affection, a bed by the window, a world that asks only for endurance. Still, not every night is calm. Drunks shout from alleys, watches rattle by with the guard patrol, and sometimes a cry pierces the fog, only to fade unclaimed. He learns not to linger, not to stare. The lamps demand rhythm. 1, 2, 3. Light, close, walk. His mind settles into that pace as his life does. The flame becomes his companion, the pole his measure of time. Around midnight, when all the lamps along his stretch burn evenly, he feels a strange satisfaction. Not pride exactly, but the quiet memory of usefulness. When dawn edges in from the horizon and the sky pales, he stands at the corner where two streets meet, watching the lamps dim against the morning. Workers pass, carriages roll, children chase each other near puddles of soot and gold light reflected. The haze smells of bread from early ovens. He often stops there, letting the smell wash over him as the city awakens. He eats humble breakfasts then, black coffee, coarse bread spread with lard, and returns home with tired shoulders but steady thoughts. Some days he wonders what remains of the boy who once traced shapes in dust. Perhaps only the habit of watching light rise from darkness, always expecting it to mean more than it does. Still, that expectation keeps him steady. The city will darken again tonight, and he will bring back its pale embers one by one, until both he and Vienna fall briefly at peace beneath their shared haze of light and smoke. A thin rain fell over the city that night, soft enough to dampen sound but not spirit. Vienna inhaled the mist as if it were thought itself, slow, swirling, and full of unspoken meaning. Along the canals, reflections quivered on the surface like restless memories, and from the heart of Leopoldstadt drifted the faint clang of a smith's hammer, the echo that once shaped the young lamplighter's youth. But now he walked different streets, older, leaner, wearing the dark wool coat issued to municipal workers. In his satchel, wicks and oil sloshed faintly, marking the rhythm of his steps. The air smelled of smoke and wet stone. He had grown used to this fragrance, a mixture of labor and endurance. Most nights passed quietly, marked by small gestures, a nod from a baker closing shop, a warning bark from a dog, the single word, "evenin'," murmured by anyone still awake. The work had become more than routine. It was something close to meditation. Light one lamp, watch it catch, move on. Yet that evening felt vaguely wrong, not dangerous, merely altered, as if the city were listening to itself. Beyond the first bridge he reached the narrow streets where shop signs hung crooked over closed shutters. Here, light struggled against the fog, creating halos rather than clarity. He trimmed the first wick, its flame dancing up with obedient warmth, then another and another, along the looping lane that skirted the canal. The repetition lulled him, but a whisper of unease accompanied every step. At the crossing near the silk merchant's warehouse he paused. From an upper window flickered a glow not yet extinguished, unusual for this hour. The merchants were careful folk. None left lamps burning wastefully. He thought of calling upward, then decided against it. Curiosity, in his line of work, was a luxury. Yet as he raised his pole to light the next lamp, a sound came from that same window. A short, sharp cry, swallowed at once by the mist. He froze. The rain grew hesitant, hanging mid-air like breath unshed. Movement disturbed the vague outline behind the window. Two forms struggling, one pressing the other toward the glass. The lamplighter's heart thudded once. In that distorted brightness, he saw detail dissolve into silhouette. A tall figure bending forward, arm raised. Another smaller one crumpling downward. The curtains billowed, the lamp flared, then darkness reclaimed the room. Only the faint clatter of something falling reached the street. Instinct pushed him a step closer. He crossed the puddles quickly, glancing around. Empty carriage lane, shuttered doors, nothing alive but the steady sigh of rain. He climbed the short steps to the warehouse entrance. Locked. A dim lamp burned inside the vestibule, painting weak orange through frosted glass. He hesitated. It was not his place to intrude. Many quarrels resolve themselves better without witnesses, and no law looked kindly on meddling workers. But the silence that followed felt unnatural, as if the air itself had been cut. He tried the side alley. There, between wooden crates, a small object lay half submerged in water. A woman's glove, delicate, stitched with pale thread. A few dark stains marked the fabric. He turned it over in his hand. The scent that clung to it was faint but distinct, sharp and sweet, more like perfume than soap. A second sound reached him, the dull thud of a door closing softly on the far side of the building. He hurried to look, yet saw no one, only the swirl of fog curling where steps should have been. For a long moment he stood still, gripping the glove. The night seemed to hold its breath, and so did he. Then, shamefaced at his own fear, he tucked the glove into his satchel and returned to his route. His lantern pole trembled slightly when he lifted it to the next post. The flame caught, obedient, pretending that nothing had changed. He finished the circuit in half the usual time, each lamp feeling like an alibi. The streets returned to stillness. Even the rain forgot to fall. When at last he reached the depot, his hands smelled faintly of oil and perfume, a strange combination that unsettled him. He washed them in the basin, yet the scent lingered. At home, something in him resisted sleep. He laid the glove on the table, observing how its color shifted in the candlelight, pale cream at first, then gray, then almost flesh-like. He thought of reporting what he had seen, but could already hear the tone of an officer's question, disbelief wrapped in civility. A lamplighter, wandering alone at night, claiming to have seen shadows through fog. Such stories invited mockery more than justice. Authority trusted evidence, not the word of a worker whose duty was merely to light what others left dark. And besides, what evidence did he have? A glove? A sound? A shape of motion? Nothing more. He turned the glove again. A small tear near the wrist seam revealed fine silk lining. Expensive. Whoever owned it did not live in these narrow streets. He imagined her hand, pale and earnest, resting on a windowsill before all this. But he could not picture her face. The fog had erased it completely. When morning came, the city looked ordinary again. Carriages rumbling, children running, Clara waving from across the square. He smiled weakly, concealing fatigue. She noticed his distraction, but asked nothing. Over coffee she spoke of laundry rates and rising prices. He nodded, though his thoughts remained miles away. The world had regained its familiar brightness, yet a thin crack had formed beneath the surface. That evening he returned to the same street. The warehouse window stood open now, the curtains gone. He checked for stains or marks, but found only faint dust on the sill. The door remained locked, as always. A man sweeping nearby glanced at him, unimpressed. "They've closed shop for repairs," the man muttered. "Strange folk, those merchants. Always some secret dealings after dark." The lamplighter thanked him and left, uneasy. From that night forth, work lost its rhythm. Every shadow seemed to conceal motion. Every passing sound tightened his nerves. He began noting faces, guards, porters, carriage drivers, wondering if any of them were the silhouette. Days passed, and no mention of a crime appeared on the news boards. Either nothing had happened, or something had happened that should remain untold. He told Clara only that a lamp had gone out unexpectedly, leaving him momentarily disoriented. She laughed, touched his sleeve, said perhaps he worked too much. Her warmth steadied him, yet a quiet wall now separated part of his mind from all comfort. At night, when he tried to read, words lost meaning. The mind replayed those few seconds, a shadow lifting an arm, a fall, silence. Weeks later, a city constable stopped him near the canal during his rounds. The officer, polite but watchful, asked simple questions. Whether he had noticed anything odd about the warehouses, any strangers loitering. The lamplighter answered truthfully that he had seen little in that fog. The constable seemed unbothered, yet his gaze lingered on the badge pinned to the coat. "If you hear anything," the officer said before leaving, "report it to the station. We prefer silence broken early than late." Afterward, he walked slower than usual. Silence. Such an easy word, such a heavy burden. Nights resumed their steady rhythm, but the glow of each lamp now filled him with restlessness instead of calm. He wondered who among the passers-by might know. Once, while trimming the wick near that same street, he thought he saw the silhouette again at the far end. Tall, steady, walking toward the mist. But when he blinked, it vanished. He told himself it was smoke. Smoke always takes the shape of what one fears most. Eventually, he placed the glove in a smaller pouch inside his satchel, unsure why he could not part with it. Perhaps habit, perhaps guilt. When the city slept, he would sometimes take it out and examine the torn seam again, as if the mystery could be solved by patient observation. But it never yielded meaning, only silence. On certain nights, he stood upon the bridge overlooking the river, where the lamps reflected into the black water like ghostly coins. A thought began to form, that every light, no matter how carefully tended, must reveal something better left unseen. He lit his final lamp of the shift and walked home through the thinning fog. The night had returned to quiet, yet it carried a cold that even flame could not drive away. And from that quiet moment onward, the city seemed to remember him, a lamplighter moving through the dark with a secret he could neither forget nor reveal. Evening melted into the city with practiced grace. Vienna, that old performer, dressed itself again in mist and smoke, and though every street bore familiar names, each night seemed to whisper a slightly altered story. The lamplighter began his rounds before dusk as always, one hand steady on the oil canister, the other on the pole. Habit guided him more than thought now. He had not spoken of the silhouette in months. The glove remained hidden in a box at home, folded between tools and papers, emitting a faint, bitter scent of roses mixed with thyme. Rumors had spread through Leopoldstadt. Missing goods, vanished clerks, strange men glimpsed in the company of police. People traded news like bread, small pieces, uncertain value. Official statements declared order, yet the tone of the constables during inspections told otherwise. The lamplighter listened carefully when workers spoke in taverns, half in jest, half in fear, about carriages that came without crests and doors that closed without knocking. He told no one what he knew, but every shadow he passed seemed heavier than it once was. His work took him past the canal most nights, where the air held the same chill scent of damp wood and oil. There he moved through the curtain of fog, lighting the row of lamps like patient prayers along the embankment. Some nights he imagined that each flame spoke softly in return, not words, but presence. Yet lately, other voices lingered, footsteps echoing after his own, hushed tones trailing him from unseen corners. Once, near the baker's shop, two figures stood speaking beneath an unlit lamp. Their conversation ended as soon as he approached. One wore a constable's coat, though its collar lacked the usual insignia. When their eyes met, the man smiled too politely. "Working late, are we?" he asked. The lamplighter nodded, raising his ladder without answering. The other figure, younger and ununiformed, whispered something that carried only the word warehouse. The lamplighter pretended not to hear, yet his stomach tightened. Within days, gossip flourished. Another disappearance, a missing accountant from the same trade house whose window had once framed that fatal shadow. The newspapers printed only a small note about foreign debts. For most readers, that was the end of it. For him, it was the beginning of unease made permanent. He noticed subtle changes, guards watching certain streets longer, new locks on office doors, workers questioned after shifts. When a patrol stopped him mid-route, the young officer was courteous yet precise. "Routine," the man said, recording the lamplighter's name, address, and hours. The tone was measured, almost friendly, but the eyes behind it calculated whether a simple worker might have seen more than he should. As he walked away, the night's familiar rhythm wavered. The steady rise of the flame felt like a confession now. He began to take alternative routes, sometimes lighting the lamps in reverse, as if to outwit unseen watchers. The pattern soothed him, yet a small voice inside wondered if paranoia had replaced reason. Clara noticed his distraction. At the baths where she worked, she teased him gently for letting mist gather in his hair and for forgetting her errands. One night, over broth by the window, she said, "You look at shadows as if they could answer you. They cannot." He smiled, forcing ease into his voice, but she reached for his hand the way one reaches for something fragile. "You carry too much silence," she whispered. He promised to rest more, though he knew he wouldn't. Weeks passed before another occurrence disturbed the quiet. It came near midnight at a crossing by the tailor's shop. The lamplighter was trimming the last flame when he heard hurried steps and saw a shape dart behind the cart stacked with empty barrels. A glint, perhaps a button, flashed, then vanished. He called out. No response. The silence afterward grew oppressive, broken only by the hiss of gas adjusting to a new pressure. He stood listening until a cough sounded behind him. The same constable from before emerged from the corner, nodding vaguely as if to signal nothing was wrong. The lamplighter bowed slightly, stepped away, and felt his pulse thunder. That night at home, he unlocked his small trunk and took out the glove again. The scent had faded. The silk lining seemed paler. He wondered whose hand it had fit, whether she had family, whether someone still searched for her. In moments of fatigue, it seemed almost an illusion, something conjured by fog and light. Yet the tear near the wrist remained solid proof. He placed it back carefully, hiding it under a folded work shirt. The next morning, an official notice was pinned to the lamplighter's board. All routes passing near the canal would now include additional oversight, a superintendent accompanying chosen workers to ensure efficiency and safety. The word safety hung heavily in everyone's mind. During meal breaks, the men exchanged glances, none daring to speak freely. When lunchtime came, the lamplighter sat alone, chewing bread slowly, wondering whether his name would be among those chosen. 2 days later, it was. The superintendent arrived, well-dressed, carrying a faint aroma of fine tobacco. He followed the lamplighter through the fog as if inspecting not the lamps, but the man himself. His speech was pleasant, almost cheerful. "You walk these streets nightly. You must know them better than anyone, yes?" The lamplighter nodded again, offering neutral replies. The superintendent's cane tapped rhythmically. "You've heard stories of theft, new at the warehouses. Men must be careful what they see and what they repeat. The city thrives on discretion." He said it as one might remind a loyal servant of his duty. The next evening the superintendent did not return, yet others lingered at junctions where once there had been only stray dogs and beggars. Some wore workers' coats, others civilian hats, but their posture betrayed purpose. He carried on lighting the lamps, the only honest ritual left to him. Still, the route had changed in the lamplighter's mind. Each pool of light seemed a witness, each shadow a secret waiting to betray him. He developed small superstitions. Never light a post twice in succession. Never cross the canal before the sixth lamp. Never whistle while working. Those rituals gave order to fear. They made him believe control still existed somewhere among the fog. On a night when frost glazed the roofs, he lingered by the bridge, thinking of leaving Vienna altogether. Clara's suggestion echoed in his mind, but leaving required savings he did not possess, and courage he did not yet understand. The city, for all its menace, was also home, a web of habits too dense to escape easily. Besides, what waited elsewhere but another kind of silence? A faint creak interrupted his thoughts. From beneath the bridge emerged the shape of a small boat moving soundlessly. 2 lanterns aboard burned low, their flames tinted blue by the damp. Crates lay stacked inside, one bearing a half-visible symbol scratched into the wood, a merchant's mark from the same house that owned the warehouse of the incident. He stepped closer, but the boat drifted away before recognition could form. That image haunted him long after the lamps had burned to half their oil. Smuggling, perhaps, or something darker. He understood now that what he had seen months ago belonged not to chance, but to a chain of dealings the city refused to name. Still, he could do nothing but watch and remember. Toward dawn, while extinguishing the last lamps near the square, he paused to rest his pole against a post. Across the street, a constable leaned beneath an awning, smoking. Their eyes met briefly, perhaps out of shared weariness, perhaps in warning. The lamplighter turned away first. Back in his room, he closed the shutters tight. Outside, the city began its morning with carts, cries, and bells, as though none of what haunted him had ever existed. Yet, inside, the silence thickened until it seemed another presence, invisible but near. He thought again of what the superintendent had said. Discretion keeps the peace. He understood now that light did not always reveal truth. Sometimes it merely softened the outlines of deceit until they seemed almost beautiful. And so he slept uneasily, under the same glow he once believed banished the dark. The Danube did not sleep. Even when the night seemed to hold its breath, some small current moved beneath the surface, steady, unseen, patient. The lamplighter knew its moods well. His route followed the embankments, where barges moored in shadow and crates waited for dawn inspection. Each night he passed the same cracked stone wall near the water's edge, its moss smelling of age and trade. For years it had been nothing to him but a landmark between 2 lamps. Now it seemed to watch. The rumors had hardened into certainty. Smuggling, bribery, disappearances. Men spoke in lowered voices at taverns, but left no names. The constables came often, their questions cautious, their notes scarce. The newspapermen printed small words that hinted at large things. Yet the lamplighter alone remembered more clearly than ink could handle. A woman's glove, a raised arm, a silence that had changed the shape of every night since. Work continued as if the world had made peace with unease. Still, there were signs of disturbance. Broken crates at the docks, carriages leaving without torches, figures lifting sacks into boats past curfew. The lamplighter grew used to pretending he saw nothing. Sometimes he fooled even himself. But the habit of looking, quiet, precise, had already taken root. The same skill that made him careful with light now turned toward shadow. One evening in early spring, while trimming a lamp near the bridge, he noticed a smudge of bright fabric caught between stones. It was the corner of a torn ledger page, soaked and half illegible. The ink had bled, yet some numbers survived, sums, initials, a recurring mark beside each entry, the same merchant's emblem he had glimpsed on a crate months earlier. He dried the fragment, folded it, and carried it home without knowing why. That night, he placed it beside the glove inside the box. The two objects, silent and unrelated, seemed to recognize each other. Clara's health had worsened. Her work at the baths had worn her lungs. The steam and soap that served others had turned against her. She coughed often, hiding the sound behind a rag, apologizing as if illness were a mistake. The lamplighter came earlier from work when he could, bringing broth, sitting near the stove. He did not tell her about the things he had found, nor about the visits from strangers near the canal. Some truths seemed too heavy to place between them. She smiled even when pale, and he tried to believe that small gestures could keep her tethered to life. Yet the city did not pause for grief. The wages remained low, the oil quality thinned each month, and whispers spread that foreign investors would soon control the gasworks. Men who had lit the lamps for 20 years found themselves dismissed without notice. The lamplighter kept silent, sensing that quietness, like a second skin, might yet keep him safe. One night, on his way from the depot, he heard a voice behind him, a thin, sharp tone calling by name. Turning, he saw his childhood friend Franz, now a uniformed guard with the municipal watch. They had shared bread in youth, patched boots together. Time had dragged them to opposite sides of duty. Franz clasped his shoulder, smiling, but there was calculation behind it. "Old friend, I've orders to speak with you. Nothing formal, only curiosity. You walk these docks more than anyone. Notice anything missing? Strange shipments, men at odd hours?" The lamplighter answered carefully. "I notice lamps, mostly. The rest I leave to your sharper eyes." Franz laughed, though not entirely in jest. "Good answer. Still, you might tell me if you hear something. There's talk of trouble, merchants conspiring with officials." They parted amicably, yet the meeting lingered like a taste of metal on the tongue. By the time he resumed his route, the city's air had thickened again, as if the fog itself carried suspicion. Soon after, another letter arrived in his lodgings. No return address, only his name written in hurried strokes. Inside lay a small key, old brass, cold to the touch, and 3 words written in pencil. "You saw nothing." He stared at the message until the candle shortened to a stub. There was no doubt now that the silent watchers of the night knew him too. He hid the key inside his coat pocket and went to work as usual. But the rhythm of the lamps no longer soothed him. Every reflection on the river seemed brighter, accusatory. He began to link what scraps of knowledge he possessed. The ledger mark, the glove, the boats after curfew. They formed a pattern not yet complete but clear enough to promise danger. Weeks passed before courage or recklessness pushed him further. One damp night, while mist thickened over the Danube, he followed the faint echo of oars past the bridge and into a bend lined with warehouses. There he saw it plainly. Men unloading crates in near silence, passing them to two constables without lanterns. The crates bore the same mark as before. When one slipped open, the content shone under a burst of lamplight from a nearby post. Silver cups, church artifacts, and fabrics embroidered with foreign seals. He stepped back before they could see him. The truth, once known, feels heavier than lies. As he left, one of the men looked up, sensing movement. Their eyes met only for a breath, but the lamplighter recognized the face. The superintendent who had once walked beside him on inspection. He tilted his head slightly in acknowledgment, neither greeting nor threat, and turned away. The lamplighter vanished into fog before the moment demanded explanation. He walked until dawn, unable to stop. The city seemed both familiar and unreal. When he reached home, Clara was asleep, her breathing thin but even. He sat beside her, letting the quiet steady him. In that fragile peace, he realized how easily one could disappear in Vienna. Not vanish into mystery, but simply fade amid indifference. In the weeks that followed, the lamplighter took to writing small notes on scraps of paper. Places, times, the number of crates, faces. He did not know for whom he kept them. Perhaps for himself. Perhaps for the memory that the river would one day demand. He hid the notes with the glove and ledger fragment, sealing them in a tin box. The summer heat grew harsh. Clara's strength waned, and she was often bedridden. On those days, the lamplighter cared for her quietly, bringing water and cool cloths. She would speak of the smell of linden trees along the river, how she wished to see them once more. One evening, unable to find the words for tenderness, he simply said, "When you rest, I'll keep the lamp steady for both of us." She smiled faintly and replied, "Then the city will need less sleep." Her death came soft, like fog drifting off water. No storms, no witness but him. After the burial, he returned to work the same night. Lighting the lamps felt impossible yet necessary. His grief hid itself in action. Flame by flame, he built a fragile rhythm over emptiness. The others noticed his silence but did not question it. By early autumn, the nightly shipments had ceased. The canal quietened. But strange glances followed him still. An officer turning away too soon, a stranger pausing mid-step near his route. Whether they blamed him or protected him, he could not tell. The key in his coat pocket remained, cool and unanswered. Sometimes he would stand on the same bridge where he had once seen the silhouette, watching the river's reflection tremble. He thought of how the water kept no secrets, only stories that scattered with ripples. The river remembered everything, yet forgave easily, unlike men. As wind rose, blowing smoke along the canal, he caught sight of the cathedral's outline far off, its windows glowing. The city was beginning to light itself with gas rather than oil now. Progress, they called it. But the lamplighter felt only the dimming of something familiar. Each new glow, brighter and steadier, seemed to make the world colder. Yet he continued, step after step, working through the hush of late night, until the first hues of morning silvered the roofs. The lamps swayed softly behind him, mirrored in the river as twin lines of trembling stars. Somewhere below, the current carried away ashes, dust, and all that men tried to hide. The glove, the ledger page, the key, all locked now in the tin box beneath his floorboards, seemed less like burdens and more like reminders that even quiet lives leave evidence. And though he would never speak of what he had seen, the thought came to him that perhaps the light he carried each night was not only for the streets. Perhaps it was also for the memory of those the city chose to forget. Autumn arrived quietly, curling smoke in gray spirals over Vienna's rooftops. The city seemed tired of itself, the markets half empty, the air thick with coal dust and rumor. Gas lamps now burned brighter than ever. Their steady light reached farther but felt colder to the lamplighter. He had begun to wonder if progress, so loudly praised in cafes and papers, meant more seeing or less truth. The new lamps were lit by valves and iron hands, not by men. Fewer workers were needed. A few, he already knew, would not be missed when their routes disappeared. His routine remained, though the rhythm had changed. Nights passed more in silence than labor now. He carried in his pocket the small brass key whose purpose he had never guessed. It pressed at his palm like a thought that refused to fade. Each time he reached the canal, he could not stop tracing its outline, smooth and simple, with teeth too fine for a door. It looked as though it belonged to something hidden below ground. He had told no one. After Clara's death, talking itself had grown foreign. At home, he moved among familiar objects like a visitor unsure where to stand. The tin box lay under loose floorboards sealed with wax. Inside were all the fragments of the past years: the glove, the torn ledger, the notes he scratched in sleepless hours. He rarely opened it, but often knelt over it in silence, feeling the wood breathe faintly with the drafts from the street. The nights deepened earlier, and fog returned thicker than before. Even sounds changed, softer, the city speaking through closed lips. It was one of those evenings when memory mingled with resignation that he decided to follow the key's call, not by impulse, but by the logic of one who has carried a secret long enough for it to become part of his step. He began near the gas depot, a cluster of squat brick buildings fenced by iron rails and marked with warning signs. A dream once told him that the key would fit somewhere among them, though he never remembered which wall or gate. That night, he waited until the watchman's lantern receded down the outer road, then slipped through the side alley where disused fittings lay rusting under ivy. The air smelled of tar and iron. Somewhere inside, warm machinery hummed like a buried heart. Finding the entrance took patience. Behind a heap of broken pipes stood a narrow hatch half covered by soil. The lock plate, green from years of damp, bore the faded emblem of the same merchant house from the ledger. His pulse quickened with disbelief. He tried the key. It turned smoothly, as if it had always waited for this moment. The hatch creaked open. A breath of cold air touched his face, carrying the scent of mildew, old paper, and something chemical. He lowered himself carefully, lantern in hand. What he found below felt halfway between a cellar and a vault. Shelves, abandoned crates, pieces of uniforms, and several bound ledgers thick with dust. The walls were lined with thin sheets of mica, reflecting fragments of light like troubled water. He opened one ledger. The handwriting inside was precise, institutional. Columns of dates, sums, initials. Under the merchant's seals appeared other marks, each bearing the crest of the city's constabulary. There were payments listed irregularly, none enormous, each small enough to avoid notice, yet together they formed rivers that flowed backward from the gas depot to private names. He read one, recognized the superintendent's neat signature, and closed the book in quiet dread. He understood then that what he had seen years ago, that silent struggle behind fogged glass, was no accident, but the price of partnership gone sour. The dead woman had probably known too much or spoken to the wrong man. He waited for fear to come, but felt only calm. A lifetime of carrying other people's light had schooled him in slow reaction. He gathered one ledger and tucked it under his coat. When he climbed back into the open air, dawn was just brushing the chimneys pink. A lone watchman turned at the far street. The lamplighter slipped behind the warehouse and joined the day's first fog as though nothing had happened. The next few nights he moved differently. He still lit every lamp, though slower now, watchful, listening for steps that followed. The sense of being observed no longer frightened him, it fascinated him. There were layers of Vienna he had never seen. Corridors of power hidden beneath its paving stones, just as gas ran under its streets unseen but essential. All served the same city, only the direction of flame differed, some for light, some for silence. At home, he placed the ledger inside the tin box, wrapped it in cloth, and resealed the boards. The key he kept on a string around his neck, tucked under his shirt. Sleep came rarely and in fragments. When it did, dreams returned, of Clara leaning at a window, of blurred silhouettes crossing behind curtains, of lamps refusing to stay lit no matter how carefully he trimmed them. Each time he woke, the room smelled faintly of oil and river mist. One evening, an orphaned boy from the neighborhood knocked at his door. The child often followed him on his rounds, fascinated by the glow of lamps. That night, the boy carried a sack of coal and a loaf of bread, payment from a neighbor. The lamplighter thanked him and, after hesitation, asked if he wished to learn the trade. The boy agreed eagerly. In that small exchange, something inside the older man softened. A simple kindness felt new again. Together they walked the route later that week. The boy held the wick trimmer while the lamplighter steadied the pole. Their laughter, small and uncertain, sounded like a fragile lantern against the vast stillness of the streets. He told stories, not of murders or politics, but of how each lamp had its temperament, some forgiving, some stubborn, none quite alike. The boy listened, wide-eyed. For the first time in years, light felt like hope rather than duty. Yet the city's undercurrent still moved unseen. A constable appeared near his station one night, questioning workers about missing records from the depot. The lamplighter feigned ignorance. When the officer left, he noticed the orphan watching him intently, sensing adult unease without words. He sent the child home early and finished the route alone. Rain fell as he crossed the bridge, quick, sharp drops that smeared the city's reflections into wavering ribbons. He thought of burning the ledger, freeing himself from all ties, but something stayed his hand. Truth, he sensed, was like light. Once created, it demanded to exist, even if few dared look at it directly. Later, in the quiet of his room, he opened the box one last time. The glove, the torn paper, the ledger, they rested side by side without accusation. Beneath them he placed a brief note written in his flat, deliberate hand. For whoever still believes the dark cannot hide forever. Then he locked the tin, slid it under the floorboards, and pressed the plank tight. The next morning he met the orphan again and gave him his old trimming shears. "Keep them clean," he said simply. "Light is patient. It waits for careful hands." The boy nodded, not yet knowing that apprenticeship meant inheritance of more than tools. That evening, as he walked alone, the fog rose higher than the rooftops, glowing faintly from the new gas fixtures. The city gleamed like a mirror turned inward, everything visible, nothing revealed. Passing near the depot, he paused and touched the key beneath his collar. It was warm now, as though remembering the lock it once opened. Above him, the lamps winked alive, one after another, soft tongues of gold reclaiming the streets. Their reflections rippled across puddles in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, a secret alphabet written on wet stone. He understood none of it fully, but felt, for the first time, that this mystery belonged to him, not as weight, but as purpose. The night deepened, steady and indifferent. Somewhere far in the city, bells began to strike the late hour. The lamplighter lifted his pole and touched flame to glass once more. A brief flicker, a bloom of steadiness, then light, fragile, uncertain, enduring. And with that gesture, he stepped onward into the mist, the secret sealed beneath his footsteps, yet glowing, quietly alive, within his heart. Winter crept into Vienna without ceremony. The first frost came early, tracing delicate borders on every window, softening the sound of hooves on the cobblestones. The city's rooftops gleamed pale by moonlight, peaceful from a distance, yet tense beneath its quiet surface. News spread that an inquiry had begun into missing municipal funds and illegal trading along the Danube. Names circulated, spoken only in whispers, never written. The lamplighter's route had shortened, gaslight had triumphed, and fewer lamps required manual tending. He had thought himself grateful for the relief, but idleness felt heavier than the latter ever had. The boy he'd trained now walked half the route in his stead, cheerful, unburdened, still unaware that every glow hides its shadow. The lamplighter found comfort watching the youth learn. The laughter carried by that young voice filled the streets that grief had carved hollow. Even so, unease returned when the fog came, denser than in any year before, whitening the night, until buildings seemed carved from salt. People called it the white fog of St. Leopold's week. It clung to hair and beards, muffled even the bells. On those evenings, sounds seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, like rumors given shape. One evening, the lamplighter reached the canal to find constables gathered beside dark water. Lanterns flickered over their blue coats, and one officer's hand rested on the railing, as though to hold the city in place. The lamplighter slowed, instinctively blending with the mist's anonymity. From what fragments of words reached him, records, superior officers, ledger, he understood enough. The investigation had turned real. Someone had unsealed a truth long submerged. Perhaps one of the ledgers was missing, or perhaps someone had spoken. It didn't matter. Vienna had begun to remember what it once preferred to forget. By the week's end, rumors filled every tavern. Arrests, suicides, missing constables. Yet none spoke the lamplighter's name. Those who knew him considered him harmless, a quiet man who saw everything and spoke nothing. Such people were seldom accused. Still, tension thickened. One night, while tending the lamps near the square, he saw a stranger watching from the alley. A tall figure, coat collar raised, motionless even as fog swirled through the lamplight. The lamplighter's pulse stirred. He lifted his pole, pretending to work, yet when he looked again the figure was gone, leaving behind only footprints that ended abruptly mid-street. Afterward he could not tell if he had imagined it or if the city simply absorbed its own watchers. The boy noticed his distraction. "You look at the fog as though it's alive," he teased. The lamplighter smiled thinly. "It is, in a way. It listens better than people do." They went on, trimming wicks, cleaning glass, until the route was complete. Only when he reached home did he allow the dread to descend, a dread not of discovery but of understanding too much. A week later he walked into the depot and found the superintendent's office padlocked, the seal of the magistrate pressed into wax on the door. The men murmured, uneasy, keeping their voices beneath the hiss of gas. One muttered that old crimes have long shadows, and sometimes those shadows stretch into the future's light. The lamplighter said nothing. He simply hung his coat, collected his pole, and went to work. Routine had long ago become his only fortress. That night's fog was unlike anything before it. It thickened from the river outward, swallowing entire streets until even near lamps appeared as blurred halos. Breathing it felt like drinking cold smoke. The lamplighter moved through it by memory alone, counting steps, feeling cobbles beneath worn soles. Overhead, gas lamps hissed faintly, their light melting into the whiteness. Near the old warehouse by the canal, the one he never abandoned from his route, the fog seemed to pulse, thinner near the water, glowing faintly as if reflected from below. He leaned over the railing. A barge rested there, low and still, half-shrouded. On its deck, two shapes stood beside a lantern, one bowed, one upright. He recognized the superintendent's posture even before the man turned toward the light. The face, pale and streaked with mist, looked older, unshaven, resigned. The second figure spoke, then stepped back, a constable's coat glinting faintly. A dull splash followed. The barge rocked once. When the lamplighter's gaze returned, only one figure remained. The superintendent leaned over the side, staring after whatever the canal had claimed, then straightened slowly and met the lamplighter's eyes through the fog. Neither man moved. The distance between them felt immeasurable, measured only by silence. Then the superintendent lifted his hat, a gesture of weary acknowledgement or warning, and walked into the white air until no trace remained. The lamplighter stood a long time. His breath rose like ghostly vines before dissolving. The fog absorbed the sound of water, leaving only the city's far-off heartbeat, a carriage turning, a bell miscounting time. He fought the impulse to run. Instead, he finished his round, lighting the last remaining lamps painstakingly. He knew instinctively that to act otherwise would mark him more than any witness could. By dawn, the fog had thinned to gray wisps curling over cobblestones. Word soon spread. A body had been hauled from the canal, though no arrest followed. The case dissolved into bureaucracy and fear. Officers returned to their routines. Newspapers filled space with wars and markets again. And Vienna resumed its old rhythm. But to those who knew where to look, Shadows had rearranged themselves. The lamplighter's reputation survived untouched. Official silence, like a veil, protected him. Perhaps the dead had taken his secret as payment. Yet in him remained neither triumph nor terror, only a muted sorrow that so many lamps must burn only to make darkness more certain. The boy still assisted en routes, eager, talkative, unaware of how close history had brushed them both. On a rare, clear night, they finished early. Stars emerged, faint but present, reflected in puddles not yet frozen. The lamplighter let the boy climb the ladder for once, watching from below. "Don't fear the height," he said quietly. "The air is thinner there, but the sight is truer." The child laughed and held the flame steady until the glass glowed golden. Later, walking home alone past the bridge, the lamplighter felt the faint scent of roses, a memory of the lost glove, drifting through cold air. He paused, uncertain if it was imagination or chance. The river glimmered faintly beneath him, restless but contained. He reached into his pocket and touched the brass key through the fabric of his coat. It had grown warm again, as though remembering something finished. He dropped it softly into the canal. The sound was small, quickly swallowed. For a moment, concentric ripples turned the light's reflection into 100 fragmented suns. Then the surface stilled. The gesture felt neither release nor surrender, only completion. Some truths could not be carried forever. They had to be absorbed by water, dissolved into flow. When he reached his building, dawn's first grays stretched across the sky, gentle as soot on paper. The boy waved from the corner, late for school, a figure small and untroubled. The lamplighter raised a hand in greeting, his expression unreadable in the pale morning. Inside, he set down his coat, hung the empty oil can, and sat by the window without lighting the stove. Across the roofs, a faint mist still lingered, but no longer hid anything. The lamps along the street gleamed faintly before extinguishing, one by one, under the growing brightness. Somewhere beyond the city roofs, the fog drifted southward, carrying away the last secrets of the white night. The lamplighter watched until only daylight remained, calm and honest. He thought of how all things, shadow, guilt, memory, eventually find their form in light. Then he stood, stretched his stiff shoulders, and left the window open to let the world breathe in again. The years unfolded quietly, like paper left in the sun, edges softening, until past and present seemed part of the same page. Time no longer clanged with the sound of bells and carts. It hummed low and steady, much like the wind through the fields outside Vienna. The lamplighter lived now in a small cottage beyond the city's last row of houses, facing a meadow crossed by a slow stream. The days followed one another without hurry, mornings of stillness, afternoons of small repair, evenings when light itself seemed to wait politely at his threshold. He had sold his room in the city and taken this house with the little he'd saved. The air out here held no smoke from factories, only the scent of hay and distant rain. To the few villagers who knew his name, he was the quiet craftsman who mended lanterns and hinges, steady and kind, but not talkative. His hands, once blackened by soot, now moved more carefully, as though each task required listening as well as skill. When someone thanked him for quick work, he would nod without looking up, murmuring that every light should last another night at least. The cottage bore the traces of a working life: rows of oil tins, neatly folded cloths, boxes of wicks. A small porch overlooked the stream, and atop a simple wooden post hung one of his old lamps. Each evening, as dusk gathered, he lit it. Not out of necessity — the road nearby had long been fitted with gaslight — but out of habit and perhaps reverence. The act carried more weight than any prayer. News from Vienna reached him rarely, brought by wagoners or children carrying old newspapers used to wrap goods. The stories spoke of progress, electric lines planned, new buildings rising, the march of modern comfort. Some faces from his past still surfaced in print: merchants mentioned in trials, officers promoted. The scandals that had once haunted the city had grown into vague anecdotes, retold without names. History, he knew now, forgives by forgetting. One afternoon in early spring, the boy who had once been his apprentice appeared at the gate, older now, coat dusty from travel. He carried himself with careful pride, the steady posture of someone trusted with duty. The reunion needed no words. Over supper they spoke quietly, of work, of roots, of the new order installing gas valves that opened by turning a single key. "There's little left for men like us," the younger man said, half in sorrow, half in awe. "The lamps light themselves now." The lamplighter smiled faintly. "Then the city must learn to tend its own shadow." His tone held no bitterness, only weary affection for a trade fading into history. They sat together long into the night, the conversation meandering like the stream outside, pausing often in content silence. Before leaving, the younger man asked about the small lamp on the porch. "You still light it every evening?" "Yes," the lamplighter said, trimming the wick with practiced ease. "It keeps the dark company." The boy laughed softly, and for a moment the years between them seemed erased. Master and apprentice again, both caught in the soft rhythm of a flame finding its shape. When the younger man departed at dawn, the lamplighter watched from the doorway until the figure blended into the fog that forever seemed to guard the edge of Vienna. He did not wave. Gestures belong to those who expect return. The days resumed their gentle procession. In solitude he found peace untroubled by past secrets. Yet at times, when lamps along the distant road flickered through the twilight, he felt the old pulse of the city breathing beyond sight. The sound of wind rustling reeds near the stream reminded him of gas hissing through pipes, the same endless breath disguised in different form. Perhaps light, he mused, cared little for the hands that produced it. It simply desired to exist, to shine until extinguished. Sometimes villagers came seeking repair or advice. He listened kindly, offering not just work, but patience. When children passed his gate, they often stopped to stare through the workshop window, watching the old man polish brass until the metal caught the faintest gleam of the languid sun. He let them watch. Curiosity deserved nourishment, not scolding. Occasionally he told them stories, not of detectives or darkness, but of light, how the city once glowed only through the effort of human breath and quiet labor. They listened wide-eyed, as though hearing of another world, which, in truth, it was. Evenings carried their own quiet ritual. He would clean his hands, pour a small cup of wine, step onto the porch, and light the lamp. The flame's birth, gentle and clean, filled the fading air with a warmth that was both physical and remembered. Sometimes he imagined that the city, still alive beyond those fields, could see this single point of flame and understand it as a signal, an old worker's salute to the passing of his craft. Winter came and went 2 more times. His beard whitened completely. His steps slowed, but his routine endured. Neighbors spoke of him tenderly, as one speaks of old trees, useful even in stillness. Then, one early morning, as frost silvered the grass, the postman found the cottage door ajar. Inside, the fire had gone out, but everything remained neatly in order. The chair near the lamp held the shape of someone who had rested there moments before. On the small table lay a faded glove, pressed flat between 2 worn sheets of paper. Beneath it, in a clean hand, a line was written: "For the silence that once taught me light." They buried him on the hill overlooking the meadow, in soil the color of ash. The villagers lit lanterns that evening, not out of grief but gratitude. The custom spread quietly, and in time became tradition. Even when new technologies arrived, they kept one lamp burning near his grave each night, its flame mirrored in the stream below. The children called it the Lamplighter's Star. Travelers saw it from the road and said it marked the place where light lingers to rest. Seasons turned, and the river carried on, unhurried. The lamp on his porch weathered storms, outlived generations. Some claimed it once flickered brighter whenever fog crept in from the city. Perhaps it was only wind or memory refusing to dim. Yet in that small, steadfast glow lay the quiet testament of a man who spent his life giving light to others. And so the story folded back into the hum of dusk, tools rusting gently, shadows lengthening with grace, and one modest flame keeping balance between darkness and dawn. Beneath its calm, the invisible world continued, crimes forgotten, kindnesses remembered only by the air itself. But on clear evenings, when the river carried its silver sheen toward Vienna, a faint light could still be seen from afar, trembling softly through the haze, as if reminding the city that someone, once, had watched over its night and never let it go dark.